Shamanism and Tea, which for a lot of people, they go, what could the relationship, what could tea possibly have to do with shamanism? And what could shamanism possibly have to do with life in the year 2021? So I'm going to do my best to try to make those connections and explain that a bit. And also, this is a theme that I think is particularly interesting. So the context of this theme is, as those of you who've come to some of these other talks know, we're working through what I call the 6 pillars of the way of tea. And those pillars, as I've said in the past, are artificial, meaning they're made up. And what I mean by that is, if you went to somebody who was in the Urasenke school of Chanoyu, which is the Japanese way of tea, and you told them there are these 6 pillars and this is what had the steps in each pillar, they would look at you like you were totally crazy. And the reason is that these pillars are my own distillation, having studied a lot of the different traditions in China, Taiwan, Malaysia, southern China, Japan, that have developed and codified a way of tea and have principles that outline what a life of tea looks like. You know, most of us Westerners, we came to tea by way of Europe, meaning Europe eventually brought tea to the US. All of us who know anything about history know about the Boston Tea Party and its relationship to, you know, taxation. And in the the early 1700s, the English took control of a port in China, in Canton, where the Chinese traded with Europeans. And at that time, the French, the Dutch, and the English were vying for control of that port. And the English had access to opium, which they manufactured from their poppy fields in Sri Lanka and India. And it was really the beginning of the Opium Wars. And at the time, it led to a significant decline in Chinese culture, in particular in the aristocratic class and the royal class, because opium's a very addictive substance. And that's how the English really took control of the tea trade. And they then claimed, not long after, to have discovered wild tea trees in India, in Assam and Darjeeling. And, you know, there's a lot of historical back and forth about whether or not that's true, or whether they were able to get enough seeds out to start growing their own trees, or kind of how Indian tea started being grown. But the point here is that the English produced a very bitter black tea because they didn't know that there were thousands of years prior to that of tea production. And the Chinese in particular had incredible ways of processing tea, and they produced really extraordinary, exquisite tea. Oolongs that are lighter roast or heavier roast, and red teas and green teas. And there was a whole panoply of flavor and aroma and complexity in the way the tea was produced. But the English didn't know any of that historical knowledge, the processing knowledge. And not only that, but the processing knowledge, a lot of it was in lineages. It was in families. So for those of you who may have watched martial arts films, or who know things about herbal medicine, traditional Chinese herbal medicine, or calligraphy, or a lot of the Taoist arts like Qigong or Tai Chi, there are family traditions that sometimes go back, 100 generations. Well, they'll claim that. And for example, the school that I went to for traditional Chinese medicine, it's in a family called the Ni family, and they say that my graduating class, we were technically the 72nd generation to learn the medicine in that lineage. So tea processing wasn't any different, meaning that there were family secrets in the way that they processed these particular leaves. Or maybe they combined leaves from a couple different mountains, and they shared their secret ways of processing tea with a couple families. So all of that knowledge, the English in particular, didn't have access to or understand. So they just said it's either green tea or black tea. And all tea was either light tea called green tea. So that included, oolong and white teas, etc. Or they called it black tea. And that's because they didn't know any better, right? And I think it might be a Winston Churchill quote where he says, tyranny is the intentional removal or absence of nuance. And while obviously he wasn't talking about tea, this intentional removal of nuance, there's so much is lost when we try to make things black and white, or in this case, black and green. And in fact, what we call black tea in the West is a total misnomer, because there's a true black tea that's grown. It's a fermented tea, more similar to shopur, like a fermented tea, that is in Anxi and in southern China, central China. And that very special black tea is its own tea. So when us Westerners call what is called red tea in China black tea, it is a total mistake. I can't think of a really great example off the top of my head as a good comparison. Something will come to mind at some point. But, well, here's kind of a radical one, which is calling Native Americans Indians, because Columbus thought he'd found India. And so he referred to the native people there as Indians. Native Americans are not Indians. They were not from India. They have nothing to do with India. This is a little bit like calling red tea black tea. It's just out of ignorance. So you can't get mad at somebody. It's just because we don't know any better. But the point is that there is a tremendous historical precedence to the complexity and nuance of tea and the way that it's processed. And so much of that has been lost as it was brought to Europe. And it also helped subsidize other industries. So for example, the sugar industry, there was essentially no sugar, apparently, from what I've read, in Europe in any significant way prior to the 1700s. And when this incredibly bitter black tea, they liked the caffeine because it was fully oxidized, very strong black tea. But even to make it palatable, they added sugar and milk and additives to the tea. And that helped with the importation of sugar from the Americas. And, I've read that 70% of the slave population in North America initially was to process sugar, because processing sugar is a very labor-intensive process. So they couldn't get indentured servants or people in America to process the sugar. So a lot of that sugar was then brought back to Europe and then introduced into the tea industry because they fit together. And sugar, milk, tea then became black tea. And for most Westerners, that's what we were introduced, English breakfast tea or Earl Grey, and they added bergamot, and all these different industries work together. And for most of us Westerners, that's what we think of as tea, unfortunately. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but most people I know, when I tell them we have a tea house here in Telluride and we have these rare, beautiful teas and aged 30, 40-year-old aged teas and different brewing methods for preparing these incredible teas. And I talk about pu'er tea, which most Westerners haven't heard of. And most people, unless they've traveled in Asia or they have a friend who's introduced them to nice tea, they kind of scratch their head and they go, "You're making a big deal out of tea, like this is just a tea bag and a mug, right? Like that's, black tea, right?" What they're accustomed to maybe is drinking tea like in a hotel lobby, when they're traveling or something, a Lipton's tea bag in a bag. And so I try to explain to them that's not what we're talking about here. So you'll have to excuse me for one moment because my wife is here and my dogs are aware that she's here. I don't. Sorry about that. So a lot of that, so that's a bit of a preamble to say that for a lot of people, they say, what could shamanism possibly have to do with tea? And again, in their mind, they're thinking Lipton's tea bag in a mug, add a little sugar, whatever. And I imagine some of the people attending this class have probably drank better tea, nicer tea, loose leaf matcha, maybe some aged teas, maybe pu'er tea. So you've probably had a bit of an experience of some specialty. So you might have some context for, oh, I could see how tea is a plant medicine. It has psychoactive qualities. It's not hallucinogenic or entheogenic, but it definitely affects the way you feel, especially when we get into aged teas, pu'er teas, or teas from old growth trees, you know, from 1200 or 1500-year-old tea trees. Those have a strong effect on the way you feel. And in this sense, they're very much plant medicine. And so we could go into the biomedical science and the chemical science of tea. But that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the health benefits of tea. I'm really talking about how tea can help facilitate exploration of one's interior life, to come into a deeper contact and deeper communication with their interior life. So that is a little preamble to some basic principles of shamanism as they relate to tea. And also, as I mentioned in the meditation on yesterday morning, you know, there are a lot of different shamanic traditions all over the world. There are Inuit traditions from Alaska. There are Native American traditions. There are Latin American. There's Huichol shamanism. There is types of Hopi shamanism. There's Siberian, Russian shamanism. There is also Taoist practices that they might not have called them shamanic practices, but if you know a bit about shamanism, that is most certainly what they are practicing. And at its most essential level, what we're talking about is developing a subtle communication with nature, a subtle communication with what we call chi or prana, or the way energy moves through the body. We are talking about a different capacity for viewing reality. Things like what Carlos Castaneda refers to as stopping time, which is really stopping the internal dialogue in the mind for extended periods of time in experiencing what it is to perceive without the internal dialogue present. And so some of these concepts are certainly not foreign in any way to older Taoist practices. And some of those Taoist traditions most certainly used tea as a plant medicine in a lot of their ritual practice. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about 4 principles of shamanism and contextual in the context of tea. And then I kind of want to open it up and people can ask some questions, or we could share some of your experiences, because again, most people think, or they say, shamanism is so far away. Like, that's something I see in movies or something that is like fantasy, you know? But there's a very practical side of shamanism. There's a very pragmatic approach to what it means to cultivate a deeper communication with the natural world. So that's kind of what we're going to get into. And the last thing I want to say, I always say that. I always say I'm going to like talk for 1 second, give you a quick intro, we'll drink a little tea, and then we'll have a conversation. And then I just ramble. So I apologize. But when I start talking about tea, I get very excited about this topic. So again, the 6 pillars are fabricated. They're made up, but they are helpful for me in studying and communicating about tea, and also looking at areas that I can go into deeper explorations of tea, different facets. They're, for me, doorways in. You could think about them as doorways into the way of tea, but they are not the way of tea itself. If you were to say to somebody, the way of tea is living by these 6 pillars and doing these practices, somebody who really understands the way of tea would say that's inaccurate. That's not true. So I just say that because I want to clarify that these are very important aspects of what it means to live a life of tea, but they are not the way of tea itself. They're learning tools, right? And those learning tools, I break them down from the innermost practices to the outermost expression. And so it's meditation first. Out of meditation, the natural emergence of virtue. I gave a long talk that's on the website on the difference between virtue, ethics, and morality, and talking about some of the Western, going all the way back to the Greeks, some of the different perspectives on the topic of ethics and morality and virtue, and how the idea of virtue comes out of some of the Buddhist and Taoist traditions as it relates to tea. And then the third is vitality, and that gets into Chinese medicine, diet, herbalism, seasonal living, all the different aspects of what it means to live a vital and healthy life. Really coming from my background, which is in Chinese medicine, with a special interest in longevity. And not just longevity, but how do you live into a great age so that you can complete what you came here to do, to complete your purpose, your mission, your destiny, so to speak, and have vital health and happiness for as long as possible in life. And then, so the first three are kind of innermost in your own practices. Again, meditation, virtue, vitality. And then we get into tradition. Tonight's talk has to do with that aspect of tradition that's shamanism. So in tea, we work mostly with shamanism, Taoism, Zen Buddhism. And all of those come out of a relationship to nature. So you could say nature is the overarching tradition. It's not really tradition, it's a way. There are principles that we follow in nature, like yin and yang, or the 5 elements, or what we call the 5 seasons. So this is one of the 3 kind of pillars of tradition, which is shamanic practices associated with tea. The next, after tradition, is methodology. So I've broken this down into the different processing methods for how do you process tea, green tea, red tea, etc. And then also the methods of brewing tea. So we have 9 different methods of preparing tea, and we have 3 core methods. So tonight I'm brewing a gong fu cha, which is one method of brewing tea. And then the final after methods is community. And I always like to quote, I think it's Tolstoy, who says, happiness is only real when shared. That quote entered into the common consciousness in the film Into the Wild. For those of you who've seen that wonderful film, if you haven't seen Into the Wild, Friday night, it's an amazing film. I recommend it highly. Anyhow, I'll let you explore that on your own. There's also a notion in some of the traditions associated with tea that in order for a person to move up a step in their own path, they have to bring somebody up to the step that they're on. And that's how we learn and we grow. When we teach something or we share something, it requires us, if we believe in authenticity and integrity, it requires us to have a certain degree of understanding of that topic. So it kind of raises the bar for us. When you can teach it really well, when you can teach it with integrity and accuracy and good metaphors, good stories, and make it really rich and meaningful for people so that they can incorporate those teachings into their lives, then as you bring people into those teachings, it allows you to learn more. So this is kind of how it goes in some different traditions. I'm not presenting myself as a teacher. I do not consider myself a teacher of Cha Dao, but I do love to share about tea. I'm obviously very passionate about tea and love it very much. So, so I hope that these things I'm sharing are of interest, and I hope they bring some value into your lives. So I'm going to continue with the Thursday morning meditations, doing 3 bowls in silence, because it's part of the meditation. But for these classes, I'll just brew 1 cup in silence, and hopefully you have some nice tea that you're enjoying wherever you are. And then I'll continue on with the talk and can kind of brew tea throughout the session. So that's my plan. I am drinking green tea. Today really felt like the first day It was really warm out. We have outside of our house a tree that's a type of narrow leaf cottonwood, and it produces these catkins, which almost look like cotton. And they're growing really rapidly, and soon they release all over town. And it creates this euphoric, dreamy thing where it looks like cotton floating everywhere around town. You know, these kind of things, there's a very Zen quality to that magic, because it's just something naturally happening in nature, but it feels totally miraculous and extraordinary. So today felt like the first day kind of spring, really, in Telluride, because we got snow a couple days ago, you know, so it's really hot out. Everybody's in shorts and t-shirts. And this is a tea I'm drinking called Return of Spring. It's one of our green teas that we carry. It's one of my absolute favorite green teas ever. It's really quite a specialty. And I like to brew it in a little gong fu pot. This is one of my favorite little pots. Zisha creates much better tea than other types of clay. But that's for another class on another day. So I'm going to brew a cup here in silence, and then we'll jump into the main tenets of this class. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see everybody. All right. Hope you're all enjoying some good tea wherever you are tuning in from. Hopefully it's some living tea. It doesn't have to be living tea, but hopefully it is alive, meaning seed grown, ideally old growth, wild trees, clean, no agrochemicals. Good tea, good clean tea, healing tea. So I'm going to just refer from some notes, because of those of you who have attended some of these conversations know that I have a tendency to go off on tangents. So if I don't have some kind of structure, then who knows where we'll end up in this conversation. I wanted to open with a quote. I often like to include a quote at the beginning of these classes that kind of captures a little bit of what I'm talking about. This quote is from a woman named Elizabeth Rochat de la Vallée. She's a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine and quite a profound practitioner of really Taoist medicine. And she has a nice quote, which is, "The human heart is the center of a territory with no boundaries." Sorry about that. My partner is brewing tea for some friends at the tea house, so we have to put up with domestic realities here at the house. So the summer is really a time. I want to talk a little bit about some aspects of Taoist medicine first, because they later will cross over to contextualize some of what we're talking about in terms of shamanism, because it will help contextualize this understanding that the early Taoists and a lot of the teachers who were at the foundational root of tea and this relationship with tea as a plant medicine. Buddy, hey, come here. Of course, there is a bee flying right behind the computer, and my dog is trying to attack this bee, which will likely affect the angle at which the screen is at. So the reason I want to talk a little bit about some of the Taoist understanding is that it will show crossover to some of the other Western shamanic traditions that we're going to talk about a little later. So the summertime in particular, in the lunar calendar, in the traditional lunar calendar, buddy, go away. Okay. May 6th is considered the first day of summer. Thank you for your patience with this. They're puppies. What are you going to do? May 6th is considered the first day of the traditional lunar calendar. And in China, it's considered the first day of summer. And they say it's a time to moisten the heart. The heart and the small intestines, or really in particular the heart for this conversation, are related to the fire element. And the summer is the time of fire. It's the time of yang energy, right? And we say that in the spring into summer, the vapors of yang. So you can think of yin and yang, right, as two sides. Yang being hot, we will say. The yang vapors descend down into the earth, and when the yang vapors go down into the earth, it ignites growth, which is what allows all the verdant, luxuriant foliage and from life to return in the spring and into the summer. And that has to do with the interaction of earth, water, and fire elements working together, and ultimately metal and wood as well. But this time of the fire descending down into the earth, where there's increased precipitation, evaporation, and solar exposure, these significant and profound changes in nature can affect human health. And so, for example, traditionally in China, where there's a ton of agriculture, workers wouldn't work during the time of day. Each organ has a 2-hour cycle. And during those 2 hours, we say that the energy is moving through and replenishing, restoring, healing, and activating that organ in the body. And so in the middle of the day, which is the time of the heart, when the yang energy, when the sun is brightest and hottest, traditionally in China, especially in agriculture, out in the fields, outside, people would come inside and they wouldn't work during that time. And as that changed over time, supposedly there are some statistics, especially in Japan, showing that it was the likeliest time for people to suffer from a heart attack or to have some kind of cardiac event, which is interesting, you know. It's interesting in the sense that we don't have a lot of these practices anymore in modern culture. Like, for example, in most spiritual traditions, from 3 to 5 a.m. in the morning is when you're supposed to get up and practice sadhana or spiritual practice, which involves breathing exercises. And that's the time of the lungs, right? It's when the lungs are activated and open. So this time in the summer is a time that's really important to eat foods that are rich in vitamins, coenzymes, and cofactors, and vitamins and foods that are cooling in the body. And so, you know, the one that always first comes to mind is watermelon. Anybody who's eaten a lot of watermelon, because it's very easy to eat a lot of watermelon, oftentimes notice that they get a bit of a stomach ache, or they can get quite bloated. And the bloating isn't just from the water content. The bloating is also because watermelon is very cooling energetically in the body. In the digestion, you know, in Ayurvedic, they call it the Agni, the fire, or in Chinese medicine, it's the fire. The fire element is so important to keeping our digestion strong, right? Oftentimes when people have weak digestion, it's because it's too cool. It's too cold, the digestion. So we use moxa. We burn a certain herb, a plant, to bring heat into the digestive system. But at this time in the summer, when it's really hot, it's important to eat foods that are cooling. So we have things like cucumbers, tomatoes, watercress, celery, broccoli, and mushrooms. These are all cooling foods. And then for fruits, watermelon, pear, berries. And these foods are really beneficial. And you can, of course, look online, but eating some more cooling foods to regulate body temperature, it's the same reason why we switch over and we drink greener teas. And greener means not just green tea, like what I'm drinking, but also young shengpur is considered a green tea, or white teas, or lightly oxidized oolongs, or light red teas. These teas are more aligned with the summer. They're more aligned with the heat at this time of year to keep the body temperature cool. So this is one example of living in alignment with the seasons. And so these are very, practical expressions, practical concepts. But in doing them and thinking about them and thinking about what plants are in bloom, what medicinal herbs are in bloom right now, and then consuming those plants is entering into a deeper dialogue with nature. And it's allowing us to start to live seasonally and to align our consciousness with the natural cycles of the earth. People often hear me say this quote because I think it's a very wonderful quote, which is, man follows the earth follows the Tao. Hold on a minute. Man follows the earth follows the cosmos follows the Tao follows itself. The Tao, if you want to think of it as the way, a conversation about what the Tao is, we'd be here for a little while. But the point here is that we are meant to follow the earth, and we just lost that because you can eat mangoes in Manhattan in the middle of a blizzard in December from Brazil, you know, like, because of the reality we find ourselves in, which is convenience, accessibility. We can go to the grocery store and pick from 10 different types of apple all year round, right? Sometimes, you know, I remember being on a retreat a couple years ago, and we spent 6 days just sitting under old growth tea trees. So we picked one tree and you studied it for a whole day, and then we spent the rest of the time basically sitting all day drinking tea, but sitting in silence alone under this 800-year-old tea tree. and just trying to let the mind quiet down. And the idea was to start to open up into dialogue with the trees, which, you know, might sound like kind of ridiculous behavior to a lot of people, but it really started to open up my dialogue on a deeper level. There was a Pulitzer Prize winning book last year called The Overstory. If you haven't read it, it's an extraordinarily profound and wonderful book. And it's told kind of from the perspective of the trees. There's another book called The Hidden Life of Trees by Wollenberger is his last name. I forget his first name, but he's a naturalist who studied forests in the Black Forest in Germany and around the world for a very long time. And he shows how complex the relationships of trees are to mycelium, to the soil, to the seasons, the elements, to everything happening. They have complex symbiotic ways of communication. For example, if a tree is dying, the forest somehow has some innate intelligence to know whether it's time for the tree to die, or if it's time for all the surrounding trees to shuttle glucose and nutrients through the root systems, through the mycelial networks underneath the forest, into the root system of the sick tree to heal it. Like there are profound levels of intelligence. They aren't speaking English, but there's definitely a communication happening there. So, on the first day of summer in China, it's a long tradition that because an egg represents the Tao, represents wholeness, you know, there's the chicken and the egg, right? So this concept of beginning and end, yin and yang, the egg represents abundant growth in nature and happiness in life. And so a tradition on the first day of summer is to drink a nice dark tea, and then take the spent leaves, like drink maybe 3 steepings, take the leaves and then boil them, and then to take your eggs and cook them. No, excuse me. You hard boil the eggs beforehand. You remove the shell, and then you soak the eggs. You might stab some holes in it, and you soak the eggs in that tea that's been boiled overnight. Or you might let it boil for a little bit, and then you let it sit overnight, and the egg soaks up all the energy of the tea. There's all sorts of symbolism in this practice, but and then you have tea eggs. They're basically hard-boiled eggs that taste like tea. They're fantastic. You find them all over Taiwan and China. And nowadays, that practice, they tend to make a really savory liquid, so they'll use star anise and peppercorns and cinnamon and sometimes other spices, and it's a really delicious snack. And that was a way of honoring the abundance of life, the return of life on the first day of summer. So in America, we watch Dazed and Confused, and in China, they prepare tea eggs. So, you know, different strokes for different folks, I guess. So, a little bit of what I want to get into, rather than talking about these aspects of health, I did record a video that we just loaded to the website called The 12 Essentials of True Vitality. And it goes into 12 different aspects of health, the 6 core aspects, and then some additional things like purpose and wealth management and, you know, stress management, things like that. But it's a nice talk if you're interested in wellness and health in general. That talk covers a lot, and it's focused really on this time of the year. So I'm not going to go too much more into that. But the point is that really foundational health from a Taoist perspective and from a shamanic perspective, true health is living in harmony with all life on earth. And thinking about what does it mean to be in harmony. You know, something that we've done as a business, Living Tea and at Mountain Gate, is we've been studying regenerative business models. And business in general tends to be so extractive. Extract resources out of the earth, extract value and time from our employees, extract money and attention from our customers. And it's not to say that those aren't things where you're not offering something of benefit too. But the bottom line is usually heavily extractive, and then somewhat contributive. What we've looked at is nature works in cycles, and when you consider, we have this kind of motto we're working with, which is learning to listen to the trees. And most of us have read the Giving Tree, right, as children by Shel Silverstein. It's such a wonderful book. And it's about the teachings of trees, which is they give and give and give. They give shade and fruit and tea leaves and roots and medicine and wood for building, and on and on and on. So we're really trying to understand, what does it mean to have a contributive, or at the very least, a balanced, mutually, reciprocally beneficial business model, as opposed to one that's extractive. So we're doing a lot of different things, and I'll share more about that. You can go into the community section of the website and see that we're starting to host a lot of events and inviting community members. Like hopefully Jeff will come on and host a class on some aspect of Chinese medicine at some point. We're giving a platform and then promoting people's events so that they can share, and giving them all the proceeds from those events. We're trying to find ways to more support and build community and help people. So that's some of kind of the foundational ideas. But the last thing I was saying about that contributive model is, one of the things that we're really looking at is, how does the different aspects of the business as well as our personal lives touch on planetary things like geology, hydrology, seasonal awareness, and how do we then affect human settlements and human culture? How do we interact with the economy? How do we interact with spiritual realities? How do all these different aspects that we are taking from, how are we then giving back to them, or sharing them freely? So I just say some of that because I think that trying to develop an ecologically conscientious approach to the way we live our lives, and understand really what that means and ask questions about that, is really the first and fundamental and foundational aspect of shamanism. It's the beginning. And that's, in a lot of ways, it's a lot of practical considerations. It's not really so philosophical. A real deep exploration of the relationship between tea and shamanism exceeds the scope of a little Friday night chat. So I want to just kind of go into some basic ideas. Some of the teachers in shamanism that I've learned from, either directly or indirectly, or read their books that I'm kind of drawing from here, are Elliot Cohen, who practices traditional Chinese medicine, Michael Harner, Doug Boyd, Thomas Hills, Don Miguel Ruiz, Peter Walben, Carlos Castaneda, and Carol Sanford. So if you want some more resources or suggestions, feel free to ask. I'm happy to share some good resources with everybody. So to introduce these 4 principles, I want to first say that, like I was saying earlier, most people think of shamanism as, magical, surreal, supernatural practices that bend space and time and are deeply mystical and mysterious. And sure, all that's fun to talk about because we all want to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves, naturally. But for a lot of folks, they might not embrace or explore shamanic practices or shamanic ideas because they have this notion of it as being like magical thinking or like supernatural. And like I said to begin with, most of shamanic practice is very practical. So there is a side of it that has to do with meditation and trance states and plant medicine and altered realities. But that is just one aspect, and it's kind of a minor aspect. The greater part of shamanic practice is around ecological awareness and developing different level of communication and dialogue with nature. So that being said, I want to share one brief story that I really like from a book that is of the more supernatural character, because I've heard a lot of stories along these lines. So there's a guy named Doug Boyd. I went in another talk. I was talking about a tea called Rolling Thunder. This guy, Doug Boyd, predated Carlos Castaneda and all the stories of Don Juan. And there's a story about them traveling by car up. You know what? I think I've actually told this story before. But long story short, they were going to save some trees from being cut down. And this medicine man, the shaman, says to Doug Boyd, "Did you bring my peace pipe? I'm going to need it." And Doug Boyd says no. And he says, "We have to go back. It's very important." And they say, "We can't. We have to get there by this time." And so the shaman then goes, gets very quiet for a while, and his eyes are closed. And all of a sudden, 2 hours later, they hear him make all these loud noises, and he's sitting in the back seat of the car, and he's holding his peace pipe in his lap. So this is this example, this idea of being able to transcend space or time, or being able to manifest something from another place to where you are, or to be able to travel in one's astral body or something like that. These kind of far out stories, or, a shaman being able to command the weather, or to be able to guide insects or animals and have control over them. I think some of these stories are what have turned off. For some people, they've turned them off from it because they say that's just supernatural nonsense. And for other people, they're very curious about that. And so they want to explore some of these ideas more deeply. I would say there's credence and importance in both aspects of shamanic practice. So the first principle I want to talk about is going beyond the mind. Carlos Castaneda talks about this. He uses the term stopping time. And part of it is that the perception of time is a mental construct. It's a mental experience. We experience time as flowing in a linear manner because we look at our watches and we look at clocks and we look at calendars and we imagine time to be linear. But in fact, if you're observing seasons, it's actually cyclical. It's moving in circles. And people who lived more on a lunar calendar would have been more connected to the idea of waxing and waning, or of moving in a cyclical, circular nature. And there's a wonderful quote by Carlos Castaneda where he says, "The internal dialogue," meaning thinking essentially, but not consciously thinking, but just the discursive associative thinking that goes on all day long, right? "The internal dialogue is what grounds people in the daily world. The world is such and so, only because we talk to ourselves about it being such and so. The passageway into the world of the shaman opens up after the warrior has learned to shut off his internal dialogue." So a lot of shamanic practice, they refer to the shaman as a warrior, because it requires tremendous courage for a warrior to go against the natural grain of society, to choose a path that is outside of society. A lot of times in indigenous culture, shamans lived on the edge of the village. They lived outside of mainstream society. And that was necessary partially because they didn't even know how to relate to mainstream society, but also because they needed to be in a deeper communion and connection with nature. They needed to learn to read the signs. They needed to learn to hunt, not just to hunt literally for food, but also to hunt for meaning, to hunt for connection, to hunt for signs, to understand how different animals are communicating to them, or how different plants are communicating to them. So this idea of going beyond the mind is a fundamental principle. And we see it, of course, in meditation traditions. A lot of the practice of meditation is learning to go beyond the mind. The reason it's called the path of the warrior is because if for your whole life, what feels safe is using your intellect to figure shit out, then the idea of stopping the internal dialogue, of stopping the mind and just waiting, just seeing, opening up perception beyond discursive thought requires courage. Because what humans don't realize generally is how deeply addicted we are to thought. And one way to see how crazy you are is to develop a meditation practice, right? When we try to meditate and you realize I can't shut it off. It just goes and goes and goes. And like, oh, I'm gonna have peanut butter for lunch. Oh, I like peanut butter. I remember one time I was having peanut butter. Oh yeah, those sandwiches. Oh, I remember that one time I had a sandwich. Oh, sandwich. Like, we just, like, what the hell is going on, you know? And if you sit and really observe the mind, what you realize is that there's just crazy making going on, you know? There's generally an internal dialogue going. That dialogue is a filter that is always present, ever present between ourselves and reality. As a result, we don't see life as it is. We see life as we are. Because the filter is so thick that we're not actually seeing things objectively. We're not seeing an objective reality. What we're seeing is an experience of the senses that is filtered by layers and layers and layers of thought. And all of those thoughts are predicated upon beliefs. Most of our beliefs are unconscious. So, you know, if you really have a strong introspective practice, and you really are questioning your life, you will start to see that maybe you've been living under a belief your whole life. Maybe you don't think you're worthy of, you know, whatever it is you love, pursuing your purpose. You don't think you're worthy of it, or you don't think it's safe, or you don't think it's prudent, or you don't think it's intelligent. How often do we really deeply question where those beliefs are coming from? You know, so the first kind of step is turning this internal dialogue off and starting to move beyond the daydream of being lost in thought. In some ways, you could say that that's the prerequisite to any kind of shamanic work, to opening up a deeper dialogue with life and with nature, is getting out of the constant internal dialogue. That's why I always say, anybody who comes to these talks, they hear me say, meditation is the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of a tea practice. It's the foundation of healing. It's the foundation of sanity, compassion, intelligence, awareness, purpose. The foundation of all of that is, again, I'll say this for me, because I can't speak on behalf of whoever says the foundation of all those things. So this is my opinion. But without meditation, I think you don't have the foundational underbelly, the underpinnings of what's necessary for all of those things to have integrity, authenticity, and clarity. So, so meditate. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, social media, marketing companies, advertising agencies, right now, for those of you who've seen that documentary, Social Dilemma, there are very, very smart people figuring out algorithms to feed on your most precious resource, which is your attention. And not only are they feeding on it, but we are so saturated in information on a day-to-day basis, unless we're consciously detaching from all that information. It's hard for us to question our assumptions about reality because of confirmation bias. So what I mean by that is, without stillness of the mind, when we try to question problems or question things in life, what we're looking for more is corroboration for what we already believe, rather than, in other words, motivated reasoning. We're using rationality and reason to buttress our pre-existing beliefs, instead of going back to, well, what are my pre-existing beliefs to begin with? And that was figured out a long time ago in terms of marketing, So now it's not a surprise that when you go into social media or online, most of what you're getting fed are things that have been intelligently architected to corroborate with and reaffirm your pre-existing beliefs, aptitudes, inclinations, desires, and passions. So we're not really encouraged to question our fundamental beliefs. And that kind of confirmation bias disallows us to move beyond the level that we're thinking at. And as Einstein pointed out, we cannot solve a problem from the same level of thinking from which it was created. So we can't move beyond. People wonder why it's so hard to change in life. Part of the reason is because we can't move beyond the level at which we're thinking and approaching our problems in our life. We can't move beyond that unless we're able to actually change the fundamental way that we're thinking. Again, reason 600 trillion million gajillion to meditate. And also to try and really reflect on, and writing is very helpful for this, because writing frees up kind of the neuro-linguistic patterning in the mind. Sometimes writing, just write, can start to get things moving in such a way that the networks start to open. Also, taking medicinal mushrooms, not psychedelic mushrooms, those can help too, but taking mushrooms like lion's mane and reishi that actually can, create angiogenesis and rebuild neural functioning, degenerative diseases like Parkinson's and dementia and things can be significantly diminished by medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane because of its effect on our on the neural pathways. So opening new neural pathways, writing and questioning, like, what do I actually believe about reality? What do I believe about my life? What do I believe about who and what I am? Getting in touch with those questions, like, a lot of people live their whole lives until they're quite old without really questioning who they are. And I remember, one time giving my mom a book by Eckhart Tolle, thinking like Eckhart Tolle really speaks to the masses, which is why Oprah picked him up and promoted him probably. And I gave my mom a book by Eckhart Tolle, and she read a chapter, and she said to me, "Colin, listen, not everybody's just trying to figure everything out." and I said to her, well, this isn't really about figuring anything out. It's actually kind of about, my mom is a wonderful, extraordinary woman, but she's a little tense, and she tends to worry a lot. And I really, out of compassion, wanted to offer her something that I thought could help her worry less, which was to be more present in life and realize that most of what she's worrying about exists in the far future or happened already. So like, chill out, It wasn't about figuring things out. So how this relates to tea is that, shamanism values open questions over closed answers. A tea practice, because there's so much to learn, it facilitates emptying the bowl and closing the bowl. There's a wonderful story. I'll give it a very abridged version of it, but about a man in China who was very erudite and respected culturally and had a long list of letters after his name, PhD, MD, on and on and on, and was respected for his profound level of intelligence and as a scholar and a gentleman. And he heard of this great sage. Ever since he was quite young, he had deep and profound questions about life, but he always tried to answer those questions intellectually. And he heard of a great sage living up in the mountains. And so he prepared for a whole year, thinking about the exact questions he wanted to ask and how he would ask them and in what sequence and why those questions were important. And he finally satisfied, smugly satisfied with his profound questions, he left on this journey and traveled for many days up into the mountains, and eventually found this man, an old monk, living by himself very simply. And he comes into the monk's hut, and he sits down with him and says, I'm so happy to be here. I've traveled for many days to find you. I've carried these questions for many, many years. Finally, somebody can answer my questions about the nature of reality. And the monk says, okay, I'll be happy to speak with you, but first let us have some tea. And he puts 2 cups out and heats the water very slowly and is kind of moving very slowly. And the man's getting very anxious. He's annoyed. He's traveled for so long. He's trying to talk to this man. And then the monk prepares the tea and pours it in the pot, and he starts pouring the tea into the man's cup until the tea starts spilling out all over the table and into the man's lap. And the man jumps up and says, what are you doing? You're supposed to be a wise man. You can't even pour me a simple cup of tea. And the monk responds to him, how am I supposed to share my wisdom when there's nowhere to put it? You have to first empty your cup. So the first lesson and the most profound lesson, the story goes on, is that unless you can empty yourself of all of your preconceived notions, beliefs, ideas about who you are and what life's all about, and you can be comfortable in that emptiness, you can just rest in it without the need to know. Or you can be comfortable with questions without needing to answer it immediately. Questions often have many, many levels. But usually as soon as we find an answer, the easiest answer, we can shut the door on the question and it feels good. We now have acquired knowledge. Really what schools should be teaching us when we're young is how to sit with questions longer and longer and longer. Because then they drop in and in and in. Because real education, the person learning is transformed by the education. They don't just gain knowledge, they gain understanding as well. So part of this first principle of going beyond the mind is developing the capacity to rest in questions and valuing questions in many ways higher than the answer. And what does that even mean? So that's a question for you. What does it mean to value a question more than the answer? And so how shamanism relates to tea is that a mindful morning tea practice is an invitation into quieting the mind, into opening oneself, opening their perceptive faculties of sensation and feeling, and coming into contact with deeper and truer and more authentic questions. That's a big part of tea. What are your questions, And can you stay with that question for a long time? I remember when, a way of tea is a path of good questions and attentiveness, not a linear path of data gathering and mechanical movements preparing tea. So I remember I was in a group that was studying some teachings for some years, and we were meant to come with a question every week. And we were meant to sit with that question for a long time. And I had this question about why I couldn't take anything seriously. And what it meant was I learned things and I cared about people, but there was some part of me that always reserved space to say, yeah, whatever. To not take things fully seriously, or even to say deadly seriously, right? We have that term. What it means, taking things so seriously that you'd be willing to, quote, die for them. And I don't mean this in some religious, zealous way. I mean it in caring for something with your whole being. And I kept thinking that I'd have the answer. Oh, I figure it out. It's because when I was young, this thing happened, right? And it took me 1.5 years of sitting with that question really seriously. Why don't I take anything seriously? To really arrive at the core of it. And it was way different than what I thought the answer was for the whole first year. So I encourage you to find a question that is burning, or some questions that you feel like we all have things that are kind of gnawing at us, but we usually avoid them, or we don't really tend to those questions. In tending to those questions, we are stepping into alignment with our purpose, because the universe has its own intelligence. Nature has its own intelligence, and it's always trying to communicate with us. When we have questions about I wonder how that thing works, or something we want to explore. When we turn and face it and really engage it and stay open in front of it, meaning stay in the question, that's how you kind of reorient your boat to go. You know, a boat doesn't go in a straight path. It kind of zigzags. But that is how we orient ourselves towards our purpose. And, you know, everybody in this group might find a sense of purpose through their daily lives or through what they do with their time. And if you feel deeply connected to your purpose, then you're already doing this in some way. If you don't, though, then this is a way. Listen to the questions, you know, and start to question your questions. Okay, enough about that. So that's the first principle, is going beyond the mind. Sometimes it's nice to drink cold tea in the summer. So the second principle is one that I really like, because I find that it shows up a lot in life. And again, it's a practical notion. It's a practical idea. And this idea is called honoring your edge, honoring the edge. So in forest management and permaculture design, where two ecosystems meet, this is called a transition zone, and there's another term for it, which is ecotone. And those edges, so like say the edge of a forest, or where the foothills meet the mountains, or the edges of a lake, the edges of a river, where an alpine and subalpine zone meet. These transition zones are by far the most fertile, abundant, verdant, and diverse in terms of species, but also diverse in terms of the sharing of resources. So the sharing of energy, and also the efficient use of energy at edges, and also the dynamism of edges, or even in terms of animal interactions. So a wild cat, you know, a mountain lion, they hunt along the edges of ecosystems, because that's usually where deer travel, because that's where there's the most abundant growth for them to feed on. So this idea, the ecotone captures material, nutrients, and heat from different sources and then moves them across the boundaries with less expenditure of energy. So on one hand, it's about efficiency of energy, maximal use of resources, and abundance. But on the other hand, it's that under duress, at our extremes, at our edges is where we grow. I mean, this could seem kind of obvious, but when you push yourself to your limit, that's where you grow. It's where you expand. The most yang, kind of like macho version of that is, if you know who David Goggins is, he's been on a lot of podcasts and he wrote a book. If you ever need to get motivated in life to just like go out and kick some ass for some reason, listen to David Goggins' podcast with Rich Roll. I listened to it and I literally like ran up a 13,000 foot mountain. It just gets you pumped up. So anyways, that's again a tangent. But this idea of what he's saying is, we have conditioned beliefs, which goes back to our first principle, right? Go beyond the mind. We have so many conditioned beliefs that hold us back from actually know what is our edge. At our edge, where it is the least comfortable, is where all the growth happens. And so most people, especially as they get older, they try to create a reality that maximizes comfort. So we have comfort orientation in every aspect of our life. I mean, this is how society is developed. You know, we drive cars now instead of ride horses because it's easier and more convenient and faster. But the thing that's insidious and pervasive about that is that it crosses it has infiltrated every aspect of modern human life. Everything's easy. Just stick it in the microwave. It only takes 45 seconds to make the meal. What's the consequence? The denaturing of anything that's actually healthy in that food has now been killed through the way that it was prepared. So the thing is that in the pursuit of comfort, orientation, and convenience, we lose everything fundamental that connects us to our animal nature, our edges, our capacity for growth, and our ability to go beyond where we currently are. So I was lucky when I was young, when I was like 16. My brother was studying in a tradition that taught, this is going back to the late 1800s, but taught taking cold showers in the morning. And so I started taking cold showers when I was 16, way before Wim Hof came along. And doesn't make me cool. Cold showers aren't that fun. But it did teach me something, which is learn to get comfortable in discomfort. That is how we grow. And so this idea of growth and expansion at the edges is fundamental to shamanism, because shamans are often engaging in meditative or trance practices that are meant to break us out of ordinary consciousness. The intention of those practices is to challenge the boundaries of ordinary conditioning, to go beyond concepts of life and death, even. You know, shamans are people who travel on the boundary line between the dream world and, quote, the real world, between the worlds of life and death, between the worlds of, oh, that's nature out there. Those are animals and we're humans. To communicate with animals, communicate with the trees, communicate with plants and nature, to blur these boundaries, to go beyond our ideas of ordinary conditioned thinking about how and what life is. That is fundamental to shamanic practice. So we can explain, if we explore that in a practical level, like, okay, I think I can only run 3 miles. What happens if I run 5 miles? That will help us just to grow maybe at a psychological or emotional or physical level. But there's a sort of shamanic aspect of that, which is go beyond your ordinary conditioning. Go beyond. What happens? Do you die? Does your head explode? Does your arm fall off? What is the consequence of exploring these boundaries? You know, tea is a really gentle psychoactive plant that helps us explore non-ordinary states without taking the toll on our psychic system that stronger entheogens do. So like, you know, a lot of people nowadays use ayahuasca or combo, or, you know, they're licking frogs or blowing smoke in their eye or whatever it is they're doing. And, you know, I'm not really into judging things as good or bad. That's not my way. And I think that sometimes those plant medicines can help people a lot, especially if they're particularly stuck in life or if they're suffering from really severe addictions. You know, sometimes those plant medicines can be quite profoundly helpful and transformative. As a general practice, I don't think they're so great because they take their toll on our psychic system. What I mean by that is they kind of rip open your chakras and show you other levels of reality. And, you know, they can be physiologically challenging for the body. Tea, on the other hand, is nourishing and detoxifying and healthy. But you can explore non-ordinary states through tea, absolutely, especially if you couple it with meditation. And that can help us to go to our edge, to go beyond convenient, mechanical, safe, and well-trodden roads and try to explore other aspects of ourselves and of life. So, you know, there are edges all around us. You know, there are reasons that we talk things over with people in our community, or we have diverse members in organizations. Those are to create more edges. It's to explore our edges. Other people have access to experience and information that we don't. So when we interact with them, by virtue of asking questions instead of having the answers, we're exploring our edges. You know, there's this saying that we become the 5 people we spend the most time with. I think there's some problems with that, but I do think that spending time with people who inspire us, challenge us, push us up to our edges, call us on our bullshit, and who they themselves are pushing their own edges. If you're around people who push their boundaries, you're going to start pushing your own edges as well. That's why most like really successful people in all the different realms of success, whatever, the people that they surround themselves are the people that they look up to in their field of interest. And that's what pushes them. That's what pushes them to get better, under duress, mutation rates increase in the genome and life evolves. So, for example, at the microscopic level, bacteria often engage in sex-like activity when stressed in order to share genetic material, and that produces new solutions to hard problems. So, mutation or growth happens at the edges. When you are under duress, when you're under pressure, when you're under difficulty or adversity, if you can step into it, if you can lean into it, that's where rapid growth happens. It's where mutation and transformation happens for a human being. So there's a beautiful quote here I want to share with you. Another one from Don Juan, who is a shaman. He says, a warrior must focus his attention on the link between himself and his death. He must let each of his acts be his last battle on earth. Only under those conditions will his acts have their rightful power. And further on, the basic difference between an ordinary man and a warrior or a shaman is that a warrior takes everything as a challenge, while an ordinary man takes everything as a blessing or a curse. So the basic idea I just want to offer as a takeaway there is that we have a tendency in our culture of convenience and comfort to see things outside happening to us and to say, and to think that we're either cursed, it's somebody else did that, or that person's such a pain in the ass, or this thing happened to me, why does it? Or we see all these things happening to us and they're just in a moment receiving blessings from life or people or whatever. Whereas both the blessing and the curse, to a person who really wants to grow, who's really serious about growing, they see everything as a challenge. And I don't mean that in some macho way. I mean it in a worldview. It's a worldview of hunting for challenge, hunting for difficulty. There's a saying in a book called the Bodhicharyavatara, which is a very profound book. If you want to get inspired to meditate and you're having a hard time, read that book. Because the first half describes all the hell realms, the Buddhist hell realms, and then the second half is basically beautiful poetry about the fruits and merits of meditation and spiritual cultivation. But there's a saying in it which is, for the bodhisattva, the harder, the better. This is a rough paraphrase, but the idea is, if something is presenting a challenge to you, it's giving you the opportunity to grow. And if you can develop that mindset, then we stop complaining and whining and whatever else it is, being victims. You step into how extraordinary life is presenting me with a new challenge. I can grow through this. I think there's an unhealthy version of this. Like, for example, there's a lot of Instagram personalities who have got these huge followings just by being kind of meathead, like macho, uber masculine dudes. And one of them is like a guy, Sean Whalen, who's got a Instagram following called Lions, Not Sheep. And, his thing is showing all his guns and his automatic rifles and his AR-15s and his weapons and, his money and his bling and how badass he is, And the thing is, this line, lions, not sheep, is deeply one-sided. I mean, I'm not going to go off on that because it's just irrelevant. But the point is that you can twist this into this uber macho kind of imbalanced approach to life, right? Which has no sensitivity. So there's an occult image that I think of it often, which is the magi, or we'll say the master, a master in life. And it's you don't know if it's a woman or a man, but it's a hooded figure and there's blackness behind. And there's a hood coming over And so just the face, all you can see is the bottom half of the face. Or no, you can barely see the eyes. And you can see that the eyes are focused on a candle that's being held in the middle. And coming over each shoulder, on one shoulder is a wolf, and on the other shoulder is a sheep. And the master is holding all the attention to the candle such that the wolf is transfixed by the candle and the sheep is transfixed by the candle. So there's different levels of symbolism in this. I won't go into all of it, but the basic idea is we all have a wolf in us. We all have a predator. We all have an animal aspect of us that wants to go out and conquer life. And we also have a sheep that's timid and sensitive and vulnerable and fragile and susceptible. And if we don't keep the light, if we don't focus on the light, the master is in the middle, which is the balanced human being. If we don't hold our animal nature, the predator, focused on the light, it will consume the sheep. It will become the animal, which is at the whim of our passions, our whims. Passions, our whims, our addictions, our aggressive nature. Whereas there's also the lone wolf. I'll do it myself. If you want a job done well, do it yourself. Don't work with other people. You can't trust anybody, whatever, all these concepts. Whereas if it's only the sheep and no wolf, the sheep will run away out of timidity, or it will make us fearful of doing anything in life, of pursuing anything in life. So this idea is that we are the ones who manage our own internal life by maintaining focus on the light. We turn everything towards the light. Okay, so that's the end of the second principle. I'm going to move through the third and the fourth principle a little bit faster because we're almost we're in pretty far here. The third principle is the hunt for meaning, and this means to hunt for meaning. And I use the word hunt here intentionally. Opening oneself to a shamanic worldview means recognizing that we can develop a deeper knowledge of life. We can observe and align with the rhythms and forces of nature. So we talked actually a lot about this one in the last one, but the shaman is working between the invisible and the visible world. They're opening up the capacity to speak with animals, to speak with plants, and also to listen much more deeply to another human being. So instead of listening to the human being through the filters or to the stance of superiority or inferiority to another person, it's to listen really deeply. When we recognize that every person we meet, we're meeting their entire education, their background, their experience, their family, their traumas, everything they've experienced in life, then we can meet them not as a person in that moment, but as somebody who's lived all the way up until that time. I want to just pull out kind of the primary thing that's most important about this. So somebody cultivating shamanic practice weaves the signs and encounters in life into a cohesive narrative that reveals universal meaning in the archetypal forces that flow through our lives. So, Carl Jung pointed out this idea through his writings that there's no such thing as coincidence. And so often in life, we feel a tug to go into that store or to talk to that person or to explore that idea, and it seems illogical. And oftentimes we don't listen to those tugs, or we don't question a coincidence when it happens because it doesn't seem so significant. And if we're hunting for meaning, then we don't let little things pass us by. You really look for a cohesive narrative and deeper meaning in life. When you're open to that as a possibility, it happens quite frequently that things start to happen that you go, wow, that's crazy, So I'll give you one example from the last couple weeks in my life, and maybe you can relate to this. There's a teacher in England who I just found, and who's teaching some specific things in a tradition I'm very interested in a Hermetic tradition. So I found this guy and I reached out to him and said, I'd love to talk to you. And he said, yeah, sure. We found a time a couple weeks ago to get on a call together, and we get on this call and he says he's worked a lot with the Yamabushi monks in northern Japan. They're Zen monks, but they're also doing shamanic practices that come out of Shintoism, which is an animist tradition that predates Zen Buddhism. He spent a lot of time with them, and they were always taking a mushroom that they said helped with meditation that they called Yamabaki. And he was trying to figure out, what is this? What is Yamabaki? He's never heard of it. He can't find any information about it. And he came to find out a couple months ago that Yamabaki is what they call lion's mane mushroom. And 1 week before I reached out to him, and before I just discovered him very randomly, he was looking for lion's mane mushroom on the internet. He happened to come across my website, Living Tea, read all about it, felt this, like, he said he felt some weird connection to me, bought lion's mane mushroom on the website, and it started taking it. And a week later, totally out of the blue, I reach out to him in an email and say, hey, you're the only person I found practicing this thing. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And so when we get on the call, he goes, this is crazy, but a week ago I bought something from your website, and then the name just sounded familiar when you wrote me the email. He lives in London. There's no reason. There's about 1,000 places to buy lion's mane mushroom on the internet. And I don't even think if you looked for lion's mane mushroom in a Google search, we're in the first 10 pages. So how he ended up on my website, I have no idea. But the point here is that is, we can't just throw those things out. Like, listen to those things when they happen. Hunt for that meaning. So Chinese Taoists who worked with tea as a plant medicine, they lived from the same kind of shamanic worldview. And, they were inspired by visions. Shamans pursue a radical and wild practice, aspiring to a deeply ecological liberation. So what does a deeply ecological liberation mean? It's the integration of the individual consciousness with landscape and with the cosmos that are seen as harmonious and alive. So, Newtonian physics, reductionist, Cartesian, dualistic, modern scientific worldview, right? It sees the world as like things floating around in space, bumping into each other. It does not see a world that is dynamically, deeply, innately, animistically alive, harmonious, and in communication. And, you have people like, I'm convinced the more I read of Einstein, I think he was actually kind of a mystic because he says things that are quite profound. And there's some quote, I don't have it here, but he says, the universe is intelligent, communicative, and constantly seeking out to engage with human beings. So, we've lost the ability to read water signs and to track the forest and to follow animals, to read the waters and to smell if a plant is toxic or beneficial to us. And so I have a quote here from Wuda, my tea teacher. He says, in our solipsism, ignoring nature to explore our own desires and satisfactions, we've polluted the earth, and only now that the warning voice has reached a cataclysmic volume is humankind beginning to hear and understand what has been sacrificed in the name of technological development. So the thing is, we have more information now than we can even store in huge computers. The issue is not enough information, not enough technology, not enough data. That is not the issue we are having as a human species. The issue is that we don't have wisdom applied to our sciences. That is not the only issue. There are a lot of issues. But we are just going to make bigger, faster, and more of the same thing if we don't have wisdom informing technological development. And we can see that now because technology is evolving so rapidly. So my encouragement to those of you is like, really create space and time to unplug, like really unplug. You know, I check my phone in the morning and the evening, and it's hard to do. You can feel the pull of like, well, I've got 10 minutes. I sure could go over to that iPad and see what's going on Instagram. You know, like it's so provocative. You know, technology is designed to suck our attention into it. So one of the ways that tea can help with our capacity for hunting for meaning is, again, this morning practice, this practice of drinking tea in silence, quieting the mind, and opening up to the fact that there is a narrative in our life. And if you can open up to the narrative of your life, you can start to see meaning and patterns. The Chinese have a term called li, which is patterns or texture, like the grains in wood. You can start to see pattern and meaning connecting different elements of your life. And from that, another map arises, and we call that coincidence. That can help guide us profoundly. But if we spend all our time on screens or on televisions, we don't have the awareness cultivated to start to see the patterns that are trying to emerge out of the narrative of our lives. I feel like this topic is a big one and it's important today. So I'm not going to say more about that, but there's a lot to say about it. But just the principle of hunt for meaning is one that I think you could explore in your own way and see what comes up for you. Okay, last principle. Thank you for sticking with me, those of you who are still here. This is one, hopefully this is an inspiring one, and we'll end on an inspiring note here. The fourth principle is to live by vision and dream. So, dreams are mysterious things, right? Those of you who have an active dream life, or even if you don't have an active dream life, and you only occasionally have a dream, on one hand, you might say, well, the dream is just like unconscious energies that are resolving themselves at night while our active neocortex, cerebral cortex mind is quiet and we're experiencing images that are floating up out of our subconscious. If you want to take that limited a view, that's okay, that's fine. But the reality is we've probably all had what I call portentous dreams, which are dreams that feel like they have meaning. They're like so vivid. And things happen. Or like somebody we've never met comes and talks to us in the dream. Like, what is that? So again, a question, what are these profound dreams? The Taoists, as well as shamanic traditions, developed very elaborate and profound dream practices. And some of the Taoist monks and practitioners that I've spent time with or talked to, they kind of laugh when you talk about dreams. And one monk said to me, he said, there's no difference for me between daytime and nighttime, except that at night, I am not at the whim of the law of physics. And I kind of went, whoa, what are you saying exactly? And he said, well, at night is when I do my meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, and martial arts training. And I said, well, while you're sleeping? And he goes, you call it sleeping. And I kind of went, wow. So what this person's saying is that they go to bed at night. At a certain point, they wake up in their dream, and then they are as lucid. What he said, he did explain, he said, I'm as lucid in my dream states as I am in my waking states. And I use that time for self-cultivation because I have access, because the laws of nature are not the same in my dream time. So if we look at that as the most ideal experience of dream time, after cultivating that practice, then it's got to raise some questions about what dreams really are and could we use them in a better way. I'm not suggesting that you have to expend the amount of energy and time it would probably take to truly have lucid dreams every night. But what I am saying is that if you're going to take your visions and dreams seriously, one way to do it is to prepare yourself for sleep at night. We usually are like on screens until we're like, I'm tired, I gotta go to bed. Or we read a book, which again is fine, I do that sometimes. But if you want to get into much deeper dream states, then you have to prepare for it like you would prepare for anything. So ideally, meditation takes place before you go to bed at night. And as you're going to sleep, there is a stating of intention. So these Taoist monks, they use mala beads, and they are on the bead repeating an intention of something they want to experience once they have entered into the dream state. The intention might be just to wake up while I'm sleeping, or to wake up in my dream, or to remember my dreams. And I will remember, I remember my dreams, I remember my dreams, or whatever it might be. To get into a very calm, very peaceful space where all the psychic activity of unresolved energy from the day, you let it go. You release it before you go to sleep, such that you don't have to start just processing all of that during the nighttime. You can actually start to access deeper REM sleep, and over time start to access deeper states. At some point, I will do a talk on dream practice because I think it can be quite profound. For a lot of us Westerners, we are agnostic or atheists because we haven't had experiences that challenge a materialistic scientific worldview. If you've never had an experience that goes beyond the five senses and, you know, reality that's described through science, that's devoid of spirit or a numinous reality, if you've never had an experience of it, then why would you believe in it? One of the, I'm not going to say easiest ways, because it's not easy, but one way to access other experiences of reality that can start to confirm there's more going on here. There's more between heaven and earth than fit in your philosophy, dear Horatio. Then, you know, one way to do that is to start to access deeper dream states and to have experiences in dreams that, you know, one common one that happens when people start doing dream work is in a dream, they have a vision or experience that then happens the next day or a week later. You know, some symbol in the dream or some significant feature in the dream will pop into their life at some point in the future, in the near future. That for a lot of folks is a holy shit moment, where they go, there's more going on here. I don't know what's going on exactly, but just having faith there's more going on is enough to develop faith in meditation and practices that are deeper practices. If you haven't had any kind of experiences, you might go, this is a waste of time. Just follow the senses, enjoy yourself, live a life of comfort and security and good friends and good food, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have deeper questions about the nature of reality, sometimes you need some confirmation to feel inspired to keep doing the work. Because it takes discipline to meditate, you know, it's not necessarily easy. Over time, you start to love it. You need it like good food and air and water, but initially it's hard to develop discipline. So taking the vision seriously means that you allow new solutions to come into consideration. You know, in the shamanic worldview, life itself is a dream. This is a dream. We're living in a dream. And it's an illusion. It's a sequence of dreams. But this definition of dreaming goes far beyond what we normally think of. The dreams are seen as a door or a hatch that opens us up to a new reality wherein we can discover the totality of ourselves. So we say dreaming the world into being. What does it mean to dream the world into being? That has to do with creating true intentions and living inside of those questions, living inside of those intentions, allowing the dreams of life to open up. Okay, I want to just say the last thing, which is by learning to listen to the trees through a tea practice, we make space for visions and dreams to communicate through our everyday experiences. This is one of the understandings of the Zen approach to finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. In the normal moments of life, we can find messages and deeper meaning that's being communicated to us. So again, this kind of ties back to hunting for meaning. Can you find meaning in everyday experiences? And so I had this girlfriend once who was like, kind of lived in a magical reality permanently. Like for her, when I tried to talk to her about a practical scientific explanation for something, she would get like pissed off. And so, you know, she was out riding her horse. She rode horses in the mountains. And she said, I saw 2 snakes today, and started explaining to me in magical terms that the snake represents the Kundalini rising and how she was in sexual energy and how she feels she's having an awakening. And the snake, one of them was shedding its skin, and she knows that's because she's shedding her own skin and becoming a new person, and went on and on about the snake symbolizing this profound meaning. And I said to her, just because I like playing devil's advocate, sometimes a snake is just a snake. And that was just for her, like, just totally unacceptable. And it wasn't an argument. It was like a point of contention. And when we broke up at a certain point, we're still very dear friends, but we broke up. And she said to me at one point, a couple of years after we broke up, she said, you know, I knew that we weren't going to last the day that you told me a snake is just a snake. And I was like, I was just saying that to push your buttons and to kind of, you know, we have to learn to cultivate discernment. Sometimes a snake is just a snake. Sometimes a snake is communicating something to us on a deeper level. At a certain level, the snake is just a snake and the snake is communicating something to us. So being able to bridge different worldviews is how we can start to see patterns emerge. So I want to just share this with, or I want to finish this with a reflection, which is that we dream in the stories that we live in. The stories that we live in about our lives, about who we are, these are all dreams. And those are the dreams that we inhabit. And waking up in the dream doesn't just mean waking up at night in a lucid dream. It also means waking up from the dream of identity about who I think I am and what my life is about. Our stories help us to better understand ourselves and our reality, because they create the potential for emotions and a scope of possibility that extends beyond what our day-to-day lives will allow. So trying to question, what is the dream? What is the story that I tell myself about my life? And what would it mean to wake up from that dream? Just sit with that question. It's quite a profound question if you go into it. So in terms of the value of visions, our visions are the shoulders that we stand upon to see over the land of possibility. Our capacity to envision is what allows us to dream our life, to create our lives. So, you know, Einstein had a daydream of flying on a beam of light before he developed, the theory of relativity. And he said that vision of a dream of light was what gave him inspiration to try and find a theory of everything, a singularity theory, which is what he was working on to the end of his life. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he followed an opium-fueled dream into the land of Kubla Khan, his most famous poem, Kubla Khan. Kekule, who's really the father of organic chemistry, he discovered the ring shape of the benzene molecule after having a reverie, a daydream of a snake seizing its own tail, which we know is the Ouroboros, the symbol of the snake eating its tail. So even organic chemistry came out of a daydream, out of a vision. Steve Jobs envisioned a computer screen that could do calligraphy. That was the beginning of Steve Jobs' work that he brought into the world. Descartes dreamed about the unification of science, and he profoundly contributed to the development of the scientific method. So you could really say the scientific method partially came out of dream. It came out of vision. And at the time, Descartes was excavating the Bible looking for secret codes. He was looking for a code to the Bible. So this is all to say, take your dreams seriously. You don't know where they might lead. You don't know what you might discover if you explore them honestly. And as Don Juan emphasizes in the teachings of Carlos Castaneda, find a path with heart. Visions don't come from intellectualization. Visions come from the heart. We don't connect with the cosmos, with the stars and the trees and the animals by thinking intensely about them. We connect with them through sensation and through a vision of the heart. Animals are very sensitive. You know, if you want to learn kindness, don't do it on humans. Humans are difficult. Learn kindness through animals. They're more sensitive. And learn to communicate with animals through the heart. So my closing note is, you know, my girlfriend, partner, wife, it's all one. I don't know. We're not formally married, but we're life partners. She does a lot of animal communication. She used to do a lot of it for people, and she helps people find their animals when they get lost with really uncanny accuracy. It's kind of crazy. And the reason that she got into it is she had a beloved cat that she loved so much. She used to live in California, and it was lost one day. She couldn't find it. And another friend said, I know an animal communicator, and she called that woman, and the woman said, okay, they did some practices together to get into some state, I don't know. And then the animal communicator said, okay, your cat is 3 miles northwest, and she's afraid, and she's in a dark place. It's not far from the road, and she's calling out because she's lost, and described some of the features of the place. That woman was in Oregon, and my partner was in California. And so she left her house and went to the exact location because she knew where this woman was talking about. Sure enough, she gets to that location. She hears her cat. It was over 3 miles away from her house. And the cat was down in a ditch in a tunnel tube thing, off the side of the road, had gotten lost and came out and was calling out and came out to her. And she was so blown away by this experience that she went and studied with that woman. And when I talked to her about animal communication, because she does it, you know, frequently, I say, well, what is it, you know? And she said, it's about, again, these are shamanic practices, about getting the mind quiet enough that all the energy that goes on in our mind gets pulled down into the heart. And then with the heart is a organ of perception. You start to connect with the heart of the animal, and the animal can feel when you're doing this thing, and it will start to communicate to you in images. And so then the images start to flow if the mind is quiet. And she said at higher level of proficiency, the images are it's almost like telecommunication. No, not telecommunication. It's like psychic communication, and that the images, you almost can feel words being communicated with the images, such that the animal is literally communicating with you. So when I said to her, so like, is it like English? She's like, no, it's not exactly like English. It's important to distinguish between fabricating ideas about what's being communicated. But she said, but it is very clear, direct communication. And again, I would be skeptical of such things, but I've seen her help a lot of people find lost animals and have the animal communicate that it needs to eat a certain different food, and then the person introduces the food and the animal gets better because it's got some illness because it's deficient in something. So this is all to say that opening up a deeper dialogue with life is a deeply rewarding and profound journey that is worth exploring and can be integrated into tea, because we're drinking tea from ancient trees that have drawn energy from nature for some cases hundreds and hundreds of years, and that if we listen closely, those trees have a lot to teach us. And again, if that doesn't work for you intellectually, just be open to giving it a try and seeing what happens. So, okay, I talked a lot more than I anticipated, and we went way over. I apologize. I just start talking and I get excited and we just keep going. So if anybody would like to ask a question or share anything, feel free. And if you need to move on with your Friday evening, then of course, feel free to move on as well. So thank you all so much for coming. One way to know that you're just talking way too much is when every cup of tea that you've drank through a tea session is really cold. Jeff, what are you sipping on over there?
I actually have an oolong tea, which is rare for me because I'm usually drinking pu'er tea. So I'm drinking an oolong tea.
Nice, mixing it up a little bit.
Yeah, it was very nice for springtime energy, which we're also experiencing here in North Idaho.
Yeah, great, cool. Lori, how about you? Where are you again?
We're just outside Toronto in Ontario.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great.
Yeah, we're drinking.
Nice.
Yeah, the First Light. I think it used to be called something else. Didn't you guys call it something else? First Light.
I think it was called Winter Light, and
Winter. Yeah.
And then I realized that then we were selling that tea in the winter, and it's such a nice tea year round. And I was like, you know, I've limited it to one season, so we changed the name. So
no, it's delicious. It was so great tonight, and your talk was amazing as always. You know, tea, everything you said is so spot on, and just has opened up so many channels for me to like some great questions, which was one of the things you brought up. Another thing it's brought up for me is, you know, that shamans are just masters at shape shifting, and I find that really goes hand in hand with everything about tea, because I feel like tea isn't just a plant, right? Like she shape shifts.
yeah,
Into almost like a goddess and a being, and even in the brewing, you know, the transformation there. And I find that aspect of shape shifting is really, you know, goes hand in hand with what shaman do in terms of blurring those lines. Tea does that so beautifully. It helps dissolve those lines and those barriers between myself and the other. And I think shamans really exemplify that and embody that. And then they're able to have no differentiation between themselves and the wind, or themselves and the hawk. They know they are that. It's almost like you were talking about Jade and her being able to communicate in a different way. So yeah, it's just opened up a lot of great, I love this topic. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, cool, great. Yeah, there's shamanic practices of, you know, a lot of times I think we see this concept of shape shifting, like physically changing form, and of course I can neither confirm nor deny that that is a thing that people can do, but there are shamanic practices of being able to project one's consciousness into animals, which is a form of shape-shifting in the sense that you could project your awareness into a bird flying and then see reality, literally see reality, not you know, figuratively, because your consciousness has been projected into the animal. So there are a number of shamanic practices along those lines, and part of the idea is to gain the knowledge, experience, and insight that comes from understanding the consciousness of the animal. You know, there's a great book called Animal Speak, and a lot of people use it because, you know, they see a coyote and they're like, okay, I got to look up coyote. What does that mean? And I think, you know, there's value in that. But the deeper wisdom of it, I think, is the book was written by somebody who's definitely doing these shamanic practices. And I'm sure there was some linear book knowledge learning that went into it. But I think most of the knowledge that's coming through in that book is really coming from her direct experience of doing those practices with all these different animals. So, you know, the shape-shifting might not be a literal shape-shifting. It can be a shape-shifting of even being able to change your perspective, being able to change your views, being able to think about the last time you were really angry, being able to, in that moment, go womp and just stay calm and watch the storm of emotion that rises and then falls without reacting to it. That's a form of shape-shifting, because you're not identifying with the emotion, you're just witnessing it, you know? So just being able to step out of reality for a moment is a form of shape-shifting, because really what you're taking is the stance of pure awareness instead of the stance of an ego that's offended because whatever it might be, you know? So that ability to step outside of it is quite a profound thing to be able to do, because it's very hard, you know, it takes training. Reason 14 trillion to keep meditating. So, yeah. All right, everybody. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with everyone. I hope you have a great weekend, and, you know, go out and hunt for some meaning and explore the edges, and see if you can identify even one narrative that you live with that you're not aware of. And maybe you can change that narrative and find a different way. So, thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Hey, Colin, real quick, can I share this with you?
Yeah, sure.
So I was going to send this to you, but since you're on it, rather than waste time and have you get a message and whatever. So I was on Facebook for I'm never on it anymore, and I saw a picture come up from Poe's on Poe's Facebook page.
Okay, yeah. So Poe is a tea teacher up in Oregon, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. And I was like, oh, I've seen this photo before. It's of my friend Ellie when she was in Taiwan on a trip with him. And I looked at the photo closer, and I don't know if I can show it.
Oh, yeah.
But I was like, wait, that's you sitting right next to her.
Yeah.
And I was like, so it was another one of those funny coincident moments. Ellie was a good friend of mine from Chinese medicine school, and I was like, wait, that's Colin sitting right next to her.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I was, that was from maybe 4 years ago, and I was on, and, you know, I was in Taiwan for a month or something, and Ellie happened to be there for a couple days at the same time at Wuda Center in Taiwan. And that day we had made a trip to a tea town called Inga up in the mountains, and we're sitting in a little tea house. It's not a tea house, it's a tea shop, but there's a man there named Master Lu who's very important. He saved the pu'er tea trade from potentially going extinct back in the early 90s. He's very, very important in the world of tea, and a profound and wonderful tea friend. And we were sitting there that day, and I think that day we drank like a 50-year-old oolong, but you can kind of see it in the faces of the people in the picture. Like, we're so blissed out of our heads. Like, we'd been drinking like incredibly good tea for hours at that point at different tea shops. So we're all just like, you know, there's this term tea drunk, right? We're just all stupidly happy. So that was a really nice day. And Ellie's a really sweet woman. I haven't seen her since then, but I hope she's doing well wherever she is.
Yeah, she's great. She graduated a year ahead of me, so yeah.
Cool. Well, if you talk to her, tell her I say hi, and tell her to reach out to us so we can send her some nice tea.
Yeah, I'm sure she would, for sure.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Oh, I want to mention one quick thing. We just put up on the website the first version of details. I have more details that I'll load tomorrow. We are having a 5-element Way of Tea and Qigong retreat from August 22nd to August 28th. I just secured all the rooms for it, and my Qigong teacher is going to be here from San Diego. She's an extraordinary woman, and Some other friends of mine who have deep experience in tea will be here facilitating. And, you know, we'll be doing treks to waterfalls and practices in caves. And Telluride, that time of year, is so insanely beautiful. And doing a lot of stuff out of the tea house, meditation, Qigong, talks, learning about 5-element food preparation, and doing this work with ropes. It's a type of practice. So there's just a lot. It's going to be a really, really amazing 6 days. And right before that, the 3 days before it, is the Telluride Mushroom Festival, where you like go and wild harvest mushrooms up in the forest, and people prepare a lot of food, and you learn all about mushrooms, which are really incredibly fascinating things to learn about. So just wanted to put that on people's radar because it's going to be a really wonderful week up here. And I have a feeling those spots are going to fill up relatively quickly. So if it's something that's of interest, shoot me an email or stay in communication, because we're going to start announcing it over the next 4 or 5 days. So. Okay, that's all I had to share with you. So, cool. Arrivederci.
Thanks again, Colin.
Yep, adios.